Comic.
Yes, it's showtime. Comic book radio showtime. I'm your host, Peter Cimetti. There we are. And tonight, my guest is the man, the mystery, NARWHAL. NARWHAL. I'll be talking to you guys tonight about all kinds of different things. Interactive storytelling in comics, engaging the audience, all that kind of great stuff, because NARWHAL is pretty damn knowledgeable about it. So I'm picking his brain about all that stuff, and I'm going to be having you guys in the chat maybe pick his brain too. Before we start, Sark, what's up? Hope you're doing well. Says nar. Kilo Papa says cheers all. What's up, Kilo Papa? Seer of all is obvious is our young Ripa and Kelly Ripa related? Inquiring minds want to know. Jaded One says good evening everyone. What's up, Jaded One? Buddha Bear, what's up? Says hail all. SDA says hi Pete, hi NARWHAL. All right, so without further ado, let's bring him on because we got an hour to fill. An hour to fill with NARWHAL. What's up, NARWHAL?
Hey, thanks for having me. Those clips at the beginning are good stuff. I was looking at them and I'm like, these are all good movies. That Rocky one, out of context, is kind of funny though. I was like, he's wearing a blazer and I'm like, is he on a green screen? Is this like an SNL skit that he came in to spoof himself, or is this the actual movie? And it's like, oh no, I think it's the actual movie.
It's from Rocky Balboa. Did you ever see Rocky Balboa?
Yeah, that was a good one. It was him coming back or whatever, his comeback.
Should have ended with Rocky Balboa.
Yeah.
I'm not really a fan of the Creed movies.
Yeah, I haven't seen those. And yeah, those seem kind of weird to me. He left. They pissed off Stallone.
Oh, yeah. Anyway. NARWHAL, how are you tonight?
I'm good. How long have you been doing comic book radio? Is this relatively new?
Well, yeah, it started about 2 years ago, but it was a different sort of show. Sort of similar to what it is now, but not really. It was more or less, and I'll do these every now and then. It was kind of a deep dive into a subject, and then I would have an open invite link, and people will come on one at a time to talk with me, or maybe sometimes not talk with me. But it was kind of like that, and then it shifted around. I want to say episode 10, maybe a year ago. But now I'm dedicating myself again to doing this, and I'm having guests on as much as I can. And sort of just doing the thing here of talking to people and trying to see what makes them tick and what they're all about with comics.
Cool.
But yeah, it's been great so far.
What we talk about, I was like, I'll talk about anything, but
there's so much to talk about.
Intro, you want to talk some like kind of comic book like stuff. I'm like, yeah, art form or whatever.
Yeah. I know you're really into writing and the process thereof. You know, there's a lot of people, and you're an artist too. But there's a lot of people where they'll show like their works in progress and their process shots for art. Like Kelsey Shannon was on the other night, and he's got his whole process book that he's doing scribbles. You know, but you're someone where a lot of the time I see that you're streaming, and you're doing like these process. You're like kind of thinking out loud and having a show about it in terms of how to write, how to engage the audience. You're big on interactive storytelling in comics. What does all that stuff mean to you?
Yeah. I realized too. It's funny at this phase of my career. I feel like like Mark Millar can't do that because you get sued immediately. You know, like if you're live streaming while writing, then. So anyway, I feel like I can still kind of...
Oh, you mean like because it's so like top secret or whatever? He's got like an NDA maybe?
Like, I typed it in the chat before you said it, so you got to pay me now. Pay me.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, but I haven't had that problem. The chat's super cool. And it's kind of... Those shows, when I do those, it isn't that many, but it's like kind of fun. And I would do it anyway, so I have been testing doing it like publicly, and it gets you more in the habit of talking out loud, and then... I've worked more and more with some collaborations since Comicsgate started, and like the talking helps a lot for me with the writing process, saying stuff out loud. Sometimes when I'm driving, I'll be talking to myself. And then as far as like my priorities, it has been zoning in more and more on just like what I call interactivity, but it's pretty broad, and sometimes I'll explain it and people are like, you're just talking about dramatic irony, like everyone knows that. I'm like, well, if I am, then I'm just saying that dramatic irony is awesome because
Sort of, right? It's sort of. It doesn't necessarily have to be dramatic irony, when you're cluing in the audience as to something that the characters don't know about.
yeah.
But yeah, and I want to just tell you though, what you're doing is you're training, you're consciously training your subconscious. And what I mean by that, when you're doing that stuff and you're talking out loud and you're just kind of doing almost like a stream of consciousness, right? And you're just kind of saying your ideas, and whatever's popping into your head, you're saying it, you're verbalizing it, you're putting it out there and making it more real than just living inside your head. You're actually training yourself to develop your ideas quicker, faster, and more efficiently. Did you know that?
No, but as you're saying that, I was thinking it's kind of like you're saying stuff without thinking of it, so then it forces you to judge what you just said. Whereas
Yeah.
early on, when I was a young writer, you might think of something and you're like, it's genius, write it down. And then maybe 6 months later, you're like, oh, that was not genius. Why did I get so excited about it? And then, yeah, so it can cull that a little bit where I'm like, I can catch the not so good ideas. But part of what you're doing is, if you're doing it even publicly, like you're saying some kind of dumb stuff. You're like, no, that was dumb. You say something else, you're like that one's better than the one
Yeah.
before.
People might think you're crazy, but I got to tell you, you're not crazy. You're
Yeah,
not. You're creative. You're not crazy. Everybody out there thinking that just means Narwhal might be a little crazy. He's not
yeah.
crazy.
No, 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 no. But yeah, I do. I have noticed I've been talking to myself a little more, and I'm like, I'm not
Good.
crazy yet, but one day maybe I can just
Good.
mess my hair up a
Well, I
little
mean,
bit.
you're not like the bad kind of crazy.
Yeah,
You're the good creative kind of crazy, the kind that breeds interesting concepts and stories and characters, and which we need more of. I think we need more of the good kind of crazy nowadays, as opposed to the bad kind.
yeah. It is a situation we're in that's a little interesting because it's like, oh man, a lot of stuff. Like I heard Tarantino say this. He's like, for just talking movies, even, which I'm particularly interested in movies. I actually don't watch that much TV. I watch more movies than I read comics, but I do love comics. But Tarantino said we're in like the worst age of movie making ever. Like he previously thought the 80s weren't so good, the 70s were great, the 90s were great. He's like, it's never been as bad as it is now. He's like, it doesn't mean that good movies don't still happen. But I'm like,
Yeah.
I agree. It's like hard. I find myself watching older and older movies just to have stuff to watch because you can't watch anything new because it's like borderline unwatchable. And I'm like, what's
Yeah.
happening? What happened? What's going on?
Yeah, stuff nowadays I find too, comics, entertainment across the board, no matter what it is, music, movies, TV, whatever. It's striving so hard to appeal to the quote unquote modern audience, whatever the hell that means,
Yeah,
that there'll be something that's obviously set either very far in the future or very far in the past. But yet the dialogue and the delivery and the mannerisms are still very modern. I can't get into that.
yeah, yeah. They want to like change the world sometimes too. They're like, I'm going to change the world with my art. And I'm like, that's already feels like starting off on the wrong foot because you're kind of saying you want to make propaganda a lot of times, and their stuff does come off. And you could even make good propaganda, but they can't even do that. Like there's examples of that in throughout the years where
Could you think of one? Is there one that you thought was a good example of convincing propaganda?
well, I just
Well done.
watched a YouTube video. So this isn't necessarily my thoughts, but I sort of agreed with the argument. And the guy was arguing that Saving Private Ryan is actually pro-war propaganda because the theme of the movie, if you actually watch it, is kind of the intellectual. There's one intellectual soldier who's a coward, and then there's a bunch of violent soldiers who are heroic. And it's constantly the theme is that violence works and intellectual stuff doesn't. And so that's kind of like propaganda, but nevertheless the movie's amazing, and so you kind of
Hmm.
just do, yeah,
That's an interesting take on propaganda. I would view that as those are character archetypes. And it, be that as it may, maybe you could think that they're one dimensional or they're not hitting as well as they could or whatever it may be. Whoever's analysis of that was propaganda. I mean, I could say that maybe there's a lot of stuff that people can look at and say, yeah, that's probably some kind of propaganda. It's making someone feel a certain way.
Yeah,
But
if you go by that definition, it's like maybe
that's
almost
like
everything. You're like, what?
everything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Top Gun is one though. Another one, and you could Top Gun's interesting because you can measure actually that it was the year after Top Gun came out. The entries into the Air Force they like tripled or something. They went up like 300%. So you're like, yes, that I mean that is like a little bit like propaganda. It's like it did what it was supposed to do. It made the Air Force look awesome, and then they got more recruits or whatever.
If anything, though, when I watched Top Gun, I was like, no, no, thank you. That's cool that they did that. No, thank you. Not
Yeah,
for me. But and hey, good for people if it got them to be motivated for something. But to me, with propaganda, this is how I would define it, and feel free to disagree with it, whether you're in the chat or Narwhal. Feel free to disagree too. I would believe that propaganda is when the storyteller, and you're very aware of what they're doing and who they are, right? You can picture that they're writing this because you go, this is a work of fiction. This isn't a documentary. This isn't nonfiction. You have to state it in facts. This is a work of fiction. You can write it any way you want. They're telling the audience essentially through their characters who is right, who is wrong, who you should root for, and the people that are the people you should root for and root against are representative of a larger group of real life people. So these people represent these people represent those people, and they don't do it in a subtle way. They do it in a very on the nose way.
yeah,
So like the white people are the bad people, the black people are the good people, or vice versa. The black people are the bad people, the white people are the good people. The religious whatever character is a certain way. The later, to me, it feels like a lot of later Stephen King, where he almost feels like self-parody. A lot of that feels like propaganda type storytelling to me. And it doesn't necessarily mean it has to play into government stuff in terms of the propaganda motive, but I feel like it's when the story's being told at you instead of to you.
yeah. I've noticed that too. That his stuff is not so great, and it seems to go with his Twitter. His tweeting is terrible, but his tweeting is funny too because it's like objectively, like, are you like is your IQ like 70 or something? Some of his tweets, I'm like, what's going on with that? And it's I don't know. So he's it's the woke mind virus. He caught it, and I'm like, what? I can't don't fully understand it, but like you're saying, that is what that if propaganda and like the like husband, dumb husband, smart wife, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it turns into tropes, but there's another motive to it. It's not just about a trope, and it's not just bad writing or poor characterization. There's something a little bit extra to it that's pushing the viewer to view not just those characters in a certain way. They're forcing you to view anyone who even appears on the thinnest, most superficial level to be like that character, that they are that character. And that's when you have that propaganda storytelling. It is admittedly a fine line. So within your work, now I do want to, before I get into it, I saw this. Willy Wonka was good propaganda.
Yeah.
The only thing I got out of Willy Wonka, and I'm just going to say the original, with Gene Wilder, as far as the film goes, not the book, was don't go to the chocolate factory.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's kind of a horror movie if you really look at it.
Oh yeah, I've written a little bit about that and some of the thoughts about interactivity, and it's that the golden ticket when he wins the golden ticket. I thought for a long time I'm like that's a rule you're not supposed to break. That's like really good luck, like an act of God. Just that all of a sudden you're so lucky that you just get the golden ticket. Like that's kind of bad storytelling. But I'm like, oh no, it's a curse. Like
Yeah.
and then they're like,
Yes.
oh, I get it. It's not good luck, it's
Yes.
bad luck.
It's about the characters learning these lessons, learning these morality lessons about how not to be so awful. And if you're awful, well, there's consequences for it.
Yeah.
So even Charlie at the end, he was gonna get it too. And then he gives up that gobstopper. And Willy Wonka's like, all right, this kid's got heart.
Yeah. That's good. But yeah, Ali Sanguis, I could see it being pro chocolate propaganda. I don't know. As soon as I watch it, I'm like, I suddenly feel the need to eat a bunch of chocolate.
Well, yes, on that level. To bathe in the river of chocolate.
Yeah.
So, with your writing, now, I'm guessing you're not setting out to write propaganda, correct?
Yeah. No.
Okay. How do you navigate those waters?
Yeah. It's like a balance of, I do try and just connect, like it's like cheesy, but like other people might talk about it this way too, where you're kind of trying to channel the idea rather than even like create it yourself. So that helps sometimes with characters where like if you're writing and you're like, I might have some clever plot, and then I kind of hit a dead end, and I'm like, okay, well, just what would the characters do? And if it doesn't even need to be a good story, let me just see what they would do. And then so that then I'll kind of do some of that, and then maybe you won't use all of that, but you'll find something. So there's some writing where it's like you have to go back and redraft it or whatever. But that's kind of one of my goals, is to try and kind of not have my hand on it too much. But that happens inevitably too through blind spots, and so I'm always wondering about that. I think part of that is your worldview does like work into the whatever you're writing, and so I think this is one of kind of a little bit what we're talking about, but like just being a little based goes a long way and helps a lot, I think, to just even being able to write, kind of to being able to tap into like, oh, that's what would actually happen. Whereas
Okay.
if mine,
So, what do you mean by that? How do you do that?
yeah, like the inverse would be like someone who's so politically correct that they don't even consider all possibilities, and then someone who's based will consider all possibilities, and then you're like, okay, this could be like where the story goes. This is what happens or whatever.
So,
So it can
according
be,
to you, being based would be being open-minded to what's possible. Is that what you're saying?
yeah. My dad asked me what based even means, and some people say it, and I'm like, I think it's like short for reality based. So if you're reality based, then that's good. And today, in this day and age, that means you'd probably get called, a bunch of names online or whatever. But that definitely helps with the writing. And if you don't have that, that can be some like late age Stephen King type stuff. He is not based.
Yeah, where you become biased. So you put the I in front of the A in based.
Yeah, based or versus biased. That's the culture war. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I would view based as being able to be objective. A little bit, you're able to view an emotional subject non emotionally, to be able to look at it through many different perspectives. That's what I would see as based. I see other people, though, that, based to them is confirmation bias. So you'll say something that they agree with that might not be that open minded or considering different perspectives, but people will go based. So that's
yeah,
why I think it's so difficult to
yeah.
define such a thing.
Oh, it's true. And all those words have like, yeah, double meanings, and word even woke. It's like it gets used in every which way.
Yeah. Yeah,
Really,
the manipulation of language. That's a good thing for us to talk about right here. So the manipulation of language that has come along. I mean, woke and awake. When you were awake, and that was not that long ago when that was a terminology, and sometimes it's still used by people who mean it in the proper sense, where you can see through the veil of illusion, the whatever it may be on a given subject, because there's all different viewpoints to consider. But then the language got hijacked, right? So now awake is not so much used anymore, or at least not said, and has been kind of conflated into the term of woke.
yeah. That's
And
what I
woke,
thought woke meant for the longest time. I thought it kind of
yeah,
sounds like based. I thought woke meant based, and I was like, I'm woke. Like the media lies to you. That's what I would say. And
yeah.
they're like, no, 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 no. It means that white people have been oppressing black people
Yeah,
forever.
it's divisive language, and if anything, the more people discuss things that revolve around the concept of woke, the more it seems like they're quite asleep.
Yeah,
It's a lot of division, and a lot of being kind of trapped in a mindset that is actually hurting the individual. It's a lot of collectivist kind of thinking, and it's a lot of regressive kind of thinking, where you're kind of trapped in the mindset of the past, and then I'm so tied to it, and there's nothing I can do that's going to change my future unless I punish the people that are accountable. But the people that are accountable aren't really here anymore, so I'm going to punish people who look just like them.
Yeah. Yeah. Another nuance on this that's like, I don't know how true this is, but I heard Peter Thiel say this about businesses, and he said he thinks a nice ingredient for someone who starting a startup, like a CEO starting a startup in like an early Mark Zuckerberg type or whatever, you're betting on people who to invest in. He actually looks for people who are mildly autistic, because he looks for
Mildly
people
autistic.
that don't plug into the collective, because that the collective is like not going to work for anything, like even like creatively kind of too. So anyone who has like, even just if it's kind of like a negative thing if you take it too far on any level, it's like a little antisocial or whatever. But someone who's a little more comfortable being like one, if the ratio is a 1 to 9, 9 people disagree with you, and you're the only
Like
one.
marching to the beat of your own drum kind of a thing.
Yeah, yeah. And I bet
Being
that's like a lot of us. I think we all.
yeah, that's when I grew up. That's what I thought most creative people were like, and I think there's still a lot of creative people that are like that, where they are individualists and they are outsiders in a way. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're antisocial or they hate people or they're a misanthrope, that kind of a thing. But
Yeah,
I think it does breed more ideas, and I think it does breed creativity to kind of have that outlook. Because like you were talking about, if you're kind of just always following the crowd, essentially, the kind of collectivist mindset where you don't want to step too far outside, because then all of a sudden, you're pushed out, you're banished, you're ostracized, whatever it may be. You kind of don't take chances, you don't take risks, and that's all creativity is about.
yeah,
So again, going back to the manipulation of language, with a lot of your different characters and stories and whatnot. Now, obviously, language is how you're communicating. That's your tool, but you also use pictures as well. How are you combining both, and how are you manipulating them effectively enough that you're soliciting emotion out of your stories and characters?
yeah. That would be like, context is like how you do it, and it's very similar to movies, but it's I think a lot of times it's, if you can build up. It did even explain like a good example of context that I've thought in the past is like, you can be looking at a picture. So say it's two guys looking at a painting. So that's the picture. That's what people are looking at. And if you open a book and that's the first page, that's all they get. But say it's the last page in a book, then you have all this opportunity to build context. And the context could be like, that guy is trying to sell the painting to that guy, and he actually needs to get the sale because he owes the mob. And if he doesn't get the sale, the mob's going to kill him that night. But the guy he's selling it to, he doesn't know it, but that guy's also banging his wife. And he doesn't know that he might suspect, but he thinks that he might be. And like, so all of a sudden that's like one picture you're looking at, and it's packed with information that's like interactivity that the reader would have a lot to take in, and they would stick on that drawing and be like, yeah, this, like, they kind of weigh it all in their head and they read the next one, and then they're kind of invested. If you cut to a close-up of a guy like just looking at his friend, we're putting thoughts into his mind. We know he's like, does he know that I am banging his wife or not? Is he gonna buy the painting or not? And it doesn't take that many scenes. You have to set it up, then that's like creating the context. But it doesn't take that many scenes to get there, and then you can have that. So you're kind of trying to do that pretty fast, is like build up context to get to where you can have the images mean more than just an image. And then you're kind of off and rolling with the comics pretty much.
It sounds like you enjoy crafting characters that have both an inner and outer conflict. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've noticed that I guess that is something I've noticed. It kind of happened accidentally at first, and I'm like, why do I like this one? Why is this so much better? And then why is this one? And another like quick example of that I've thought in the past is like just an example, but it's like two boys go on a quest for the golden fleece, and they're sailing the high seas, and they get hit by a storm. One boy falls out of the water, and the other boy looks at him, and he's gonna help him, basically. So that's like one kind of, that's still like decent, but then you can add some context if you're like, okay, they're both in love with the same girl back home. they're like rivals in love. Then it kind of changes it. One boy falls. You're like, maybe he's gonna let his friend die so he can get the girl. Like, is he gonna? That would be terrible. And you cut to his face, and we're like waiting. We see he's thinking.
Like, what are
and
his
then the
true
moment
motives?
he does grab his friend. Yeah,
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 yeah.
and you're like, good, he did to grab his friend, help his friend out.
Or he didn't.
And it
You're
is.
like,
It
oh
seems.
my lord, what a
Yeah, yeah,
bastard.
yeah. I know. Yeah. So you can build it up either way, and it seems like it's
You're
simple.
subvert expectations. See, that's a good way to subvert expectations, because that has been kind of bandied about as just like a go-to, and it usually means like you do something that's completely out of character and isn't that so clever. But the thing is, there's hardly ever build up and rhyme or reason and a motive. Usually when you subvert the expectation, then it's kind of going back and you're retreading the reasoning as to why this has occurred, and you've been played the whole time by this character. So you feel the betrayal at that point, and you feel the betrayal for the characters they've betrayed. So it's emotionally gripping.
Yeah.
But when it's just, there's nothing there for that, it's just a character acting out of context and just randomly, that's bad writing.
Yeah, yeah. You really don't want it to be meta, where that's your only out as the writer is to be like, wink, wink. Bet you didn't see that coming. Now my story's original because you didn't expect that. And like I get like Daredevil, he'll actually, or sorry, not Daredevil, Deadpool. He'll look at the camera and actually say that, and so that like is almost double meta.
Breaking the fourth wall.
Yeah, but a lot of movies, I'm trying to think of where they subvert. Well, the ultimate terrible one is The Last Jedi, where it's like you just know that he's too aware of his movie in relation to the other movies, kind of.
Yeah, and he's trying to find a way to stand out so much that it betrays the characters and their motivations.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very strange thing, especially because within a story like that, with certain characters, for instance, on the flip side, same thing, Star Wars, Return of the Jedi. At the end, Darth Vader subverts expectations by picking up that Emperor,
Yeah.
and chucking him over, because he gets back in touch with a part of his humanity that's watching his son get killed.
Yeah.
And something clicks.
Yeah.
Oh, it's beautiful, especially the true version that doesn't involve him going no.
Yeah.
Like, that's just, when it's silent and he's looking back and forth.
Yeah.
He's looking.
Yeah.
And then he's just like, all right,
That's so,
to do it, he dies because of that.
Yeah, that is like so good. Obviously, it's like so classic. But that stuff, like they did that kind of interactivity thing, and then you can kind of see like that is one way to get classic, become classic. I've wondered about that. This another metric of like how do you even get memorable? Like what gets forgotten, what gets remembered. A lot of the classics have the interactivity, but you can sort one quick way to look for it is if they're showing just a person's face and you know what they're thinking, then that means there's like good context, and so it's pretty good storytelling.
Yeah, it's the same thing within comics as it is within filmmaking. When you get that kind of lingerie shot, and that's the thing, you have to utilize every panel effectively. If you're kind of willy-nilly all over the place and you're utilizing panels and it's like it doesn't make any rhyme or reason of a lick of sense as to why the panel is there or why that shot's on that character or that aspect of that character, it's much harder to read into that and have the audience interact with that story. Same thing with film. You got that shot on a character looking a certain way, and you can read the emotion or expression on their face, and you're like, something is up.
Yeah.
And that's effective storytelling.
Yeah, but if it's you don't want it to be like diarrhea or all over, because then there's nothing for the audience to work with, the kind of language that you're building.
Yeah. And it's kind of insulting to the audience when you start over-explaining things like that. When you've got the good pause, the dramatic pause of a shot, or you're hinting at something with a panel, and then you're over-explaining. Well, as we can see, there's a something on this person, and that's making them think twice about what's occurring. That's overkill. Again, bad writing.
Yeah.
And then there's no interactivity, correct, with the audience, because you're talking at them instead of having them experience the story.
Yeah, definitely. Because everyone approaches it differently, and so some people will just say, "Show don't tell." That alone will get you some good interactivity. I'm pretty sure. So, like that's a great mantra to live by as well.
Yeah, yeah. I find though that nowadays show don't tell has been pushed to such an extreme that people are also forgetting to tell the story. So they're having so much show go on without the clarity of the visual. So I mean, you really need a once in a generation artist to effectively carry a story with very little narration, exposition, dialogue, etc. And I find there's a lot of people nowadays that are writers, and it's hard to use that word in some sense when they do this, that they don't really tell the story. They're relying so much on the visual to carry the story that you're really not getting a sense of anything deeper than what you're seeing. And I kind of can't stand stories like that when they don't have any depth to them in the writing. Because then I just think, well, why are you here? Just go away. Let me just look at the pictures. Can I just look at the pictures?
Yeah. Lit Dev, I was on his show and he said action movies are actually kind of like musicals where the action scene has to bring the story forward. And a good musical number has to bring the story forward. If it doesn't,
it can't just be a song for the sake of a song.
Yeah, and that's like you can picture a lot of movies where they're just showing, they almost misinterpret show don't tell, and they're showing too much. I'm gonna let my dog out real quick. 1 second.
All right. While Narwhal lets his dog out, we're actually going to go to a quick commercial break. That worked out perfectly. If Narwhal comes back and he's confused, that's why. So I was going to say, Narwhal, it works out. We're at the halfway point. We're going to take a quick little commercial break, show a couple trailers here for about 2 minutes, and then we'll be right back. Cool? All right. You're watching Comic Book Radio. This is episode 35. I am your host, Peter Cimetti, and tonight my guest is Narwhal. We're going to be talking about writing and more good stuff when we get back. Sit right there. Don't go anywhere. 2 more minutes. That's it. Just 2 minutes. Get a drink. Go to the bathroom. Whatever. We'll be right back.
Hello everybody, this is Logan Effling, the creator of the comic book Firewatch. It's an action-adventure in a supernatural setting inspired by the great Gold Key era of non-superhero comics, such as Turok, Tarzan, and the Mighty Samson. If you yourself are into non-superhero comics, I think it's worth checking out.
And we're back. Welcome to Comic Book Radio, episode 35. My guest tonight is Narwhal. I'm going to put the link in the chat here. Narwhal, have you ever seen the show? This is something that we do. I put the link in the chat, and if anyone wants to join, they can feel free to do so. One at a time. If you've got a question or comment for my guest tonight, Narwhal, feel free to join the show and stop in and say hello. Don't be shy. One thing before we do progress, I know the story, but maybe people out there don't. Your real birth name is not Narwhal, correct?
Yeah, my real name is Per Berg.
Isn't that Peter in Finnish? Is it?
Yeah, it's like I think it's like the equivalent of Peter, basically.
Very
in
nice.
Like Swedish or something. Yeah.
Good name. Good name. Why Narwhal?
Yeah, it was my fake company from way back in the day. It was just called Narwhal Comics, and then I went on with Ethan way long ago for Comicsgate. I'd drawn um, a fan art of Cyberfrog, and I had the first Earthbound campaign was crowdfunding, and so he had me on because he liked the fan art, and then he's like, it populated automatically my Google account instead of my name, so it says Narwhal, and he goes like, so do I just call you Narwhal? And I was like, yes. And so ever since then I was Narwhal because I didn't want to tell him my name's Pear, and he's like, what, pear? Like the fruit? Yeah, Swedish name. That's usually what I say. So.
P-E-R. P-E-R.
Yeah.
Eric the Guapo says, no, my immersion gone. We're revealing secrets and ruining Eric's immersion
He really
tonight.
saw me as a Narwhal that whole time.
Dr. Mask says it's the Pete and Pete show. I guess essentially, yeah, yes, it is.
Oh yeah, that's cool.
So going back a bit to your writing, how do you, as a writer, detach yourself from your characters, especially their voice, so that they just don't end up sounding like you do? You do any kind of you go and have any kind of what is it? Maybe like some kind of either a strategy or something that you do to prepare yourself to get in character for your characters, or does it just come naturally to you?
Yeah, it doesn't exactly come naturally. If I do nothing, they probably do all talk a little bit like me. But then I do little exercises to try and get out of that. Like I'll sometimes base a character on an actor and just in my head. And so they'll be in my head talking like the actor, and usually I'm picking like an actor with an accent, like so it's not even like, oh, it's like this very nuanced type, Peter O'Toole, very famous British accent, Lawrence of Arabia, so I'm like, this guy's like posh British accent. And so then I'm just typing that up, and
to kind of give you the right like inflection of the voice and the cadence, that kind of a thing.
Yeah,
you would imagine
and that's
that
you have to do once you know that, like you can kind of, and you don't have to like write it like super, what's it called, where if you're typing out every little syllable, but just knowing that will kind of, using certain words or whatever, and talking in a certain way. If it's more like verbose, less verbose, some of those ways where you can dial it down or up, that comes up. And then, but a lot of it just comes it's maybe like the second draft. Once you do know the characters better, they'll naturally talk just a little bit different because of like their situation or whatever. And then that alone is hopefully enough. But you do have to kind of take a look at it, really.
So do you say that dialogue out loud? Do you kind of act out a scene?
I didn't do that too much, but you know what? Recently, since a couple years ago, I've started working with voice actors because I've been dabbling in some animation, and that was amazing process. That was very mind-opening because one of the things is like immediately I got real self-conscious about what I had written because someone's going to read it out loud, someone else besides me even. And then so I'm like, okay, it has to be good. So you try and fix it up and you're like, is it even good? I still don't know. And then they'll read it and you still like, I'm almost like want to crawl into a hole or whatever, but they'll read it and it sounds pretty good and they might like it or whatever. And I'm like, then you kind of get a little confidence. But that did help a lot and helped me hearing it in my own head. And then working with them, I have been reading it out loud more to myself. And it is a little bit like thinking about it as an actor would. Part of it is like an actor does not get embarrassed, so like they say it and mean it, so if you can say it and mean it, that helps a lot too. And maybe you have to be alone to be able to do that because it is embarrassing if like your roommate's right there and you're trying
and you don't want to have to explain to them what you're doing, and that gets you out of the zone. It's an interesting that you bring up interesting thing you bring up there too, about the fact that when you're putting together this dialogue and sometimes you do have to take this effort to make sure that you're not exactly sounding just like your characters. When you're doing that, when you're doing that, do you find that it's easier for you to get lost into the characters that aren't you, or do you like sticking with the characters that are more like you?
Yeah, I like the ones that aren't me probably, and I think like just even with Earthbound, the hardest character is WizKid because he's a little bit the most of an enigma. He's kind of like the straight man. He's the most normal, and he goes between the weirdos kind of. And I can write the weirdos easy, and it's fun, and they do have special ways of talking. So for a long time, I was like, "What is WizKid's even deal? Is he like literally a cardboard cutout? Is he like a bad character?" And I've written him enough now where I'm like, okay, he's like a little bit like Sherlock Holmes, but he doesn't play it up. But he's like a tactical genius, and that's kind of a little bit of his character, um, and maybe some other aspects beyond that. But the way Sherlock Holmes is kind of like that too, with has some flaws, like gets easily bored and stuff like that.
Yeah, a drug addict.
Yeah,
You know, yeah.
yeah. So
Because
sometimes it just takes one little revelation to latch onto, and that will lead to whatever else you need from the character a lot of times too. Like even back to with Earthbound, it was Julia and Spaceman. The idea even that their just approach to the problem of the story is kind of opposite, where she's the one who's more sneaky and tricky, and he's the brute force guy. And that, so I'm like, okay, that I kind of know their characters just from that aspect of it.
what are some of the more interesting flaws that you've given your characters? Some of the ones you really like?
Yeah, good question. What anytime if they can get, I've been exploring this myself. I want to be able to write a little more unlikable characters because if you write unlikable, surprisingly, it makes them more likable a lot of times, weirdly enough. And that sort of happened with Earthbound. A lot of people's favorite character was Spaceman. I wrote him to be the villain, but he was everyone's favorite character. And I'm like, because he's the guy who does what he wants right in the moment when he wants it. So, and that's like could be considered a flaw. So he could be like an example where that really worked out. WizKid's an example where it's been really hard. And then like what other?
I think anytime you've got a character that's going to do what they want when they want, it's kind of a selfishy sort of character. It maybe even seems like they're out for their own self-interest. That turns into a character that a lot of people love. Because normally you can't really be that way in day-to-day life.
Yeah, totally. It's like a fantasy fulfillment thing. There's a meme everyone's talking about now, too. They say, literally me. And that's like a relatability thing. And maybe they don't relate to like if Spaceman does something they would never do, but they can relate to wanting to have done that or whatever. Like if he punches out someone, when we would never do that, but he did. And you're like, that's cool. Whatever.
Yeah, you're like, oh, it's cathartic. You're like, all those times I woulda, coulda, shoulda,
Yeah.
If anything, I find that a truly unlikable character tends to be the character you think people might maybe they don't feel too much for them. They're a know-it-all. They're very self-assured, but not in a cocky kind of way. Just like nothing seems to faze them. They're a know-it-all. They're very virtuous in some way. And those can be unlikable things unless you knock that character down a few pegs and have them learn some lessons. But when you don't have that happen, I think that's where a lot of writers nowadays are kind of struggling to understand, because they're like, well, why you should like this character. They do everything great,
Yeah.
They don't really have any flaws. What is there to hate? Not understanding that people don't not like other people because of flaws. We all have flaws. That makes you relatable. People don't like perfect people.
Yeah. An example of that one that I hold up in my head as being almost perfect, but it's the script for Toy Story. And I guess it was supposedly written by Joss Whedon. But in that one, Woody, he's not likable until he gets brought down a peg and learns some lessons. It starts and he's like like, yeah, he really is super jealous of Buzz, and he's a little bitch. And then he basically murders Buzz, but Buzz doesn't die. So then he has to save Buzz. So he's actually kind of like the villain of his own.
Oh yeah,
movie.
yeah.
And I'm like, that's cool. That they did that is structured really well. And yeah, that's missing from modern stuff. Just
Yeah, and he has to be debased to such a degree that he's basically gonna be tortured and mutilated at Sid's house, you know.
yeah.
So and he sees what all the other rejects and you know, castaways now that he's with them. He sees what that's like, and now it's like, wow, okay, you know, he's humbled, you know.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, is you need those moments, you need that to occur, you need all of that to happen with this character to then want to root for them to get out of it. But nowadays, when people are creating these characters, it really is strange. It's strange that they can't, and it all goes back to whether or not it's bad writing or whatever it may be. I don't know. I don't know if it's derivative writing. I don't know if it's emulation. I don't know if it's trying too hard with some characters. That's what they think the cool factor is of a character. You know, that they think the cool factor is that it's this character who's perfect.
Yeah.
But that's not what makes characters likable.
I know it is just funny because it's literally basically the opposite. One other thing that makes a character super unlikable is if they don't have anything to do in the story or like in the plot. Like if they're kind of just tagging along and saying this and that here and there. Usually the audience will be rooting for them to die, and you could get meta with that where you're
like the Jar Jar Binkses.
Yeah, and then they tried to fix that later by giving Jar Jar something to do, and that was like a joke in itself.
Yeah.
He's the one guy who proposes the vote to make Palpatine.
Yeah. It's just like throwing
Yeah,
a bone
Jar
at
Jar,
Jar
get the
Jar.
fuck out of here.
And it's like, what are you? You're not dead yet? How are you not dead yet?
Yeah, but that's a funny kind of interactivity, is where the audience is rooting for someone to die, and then you don't let that person die. But in that case, it's all accidental. But there's an example in Train to Busan. Do you remember that movie? Have you seen that one?
I've heard of it. I haven't seen it.
Yeah, so it's a Korean zombie movie, and it's really good. But I think it's the bad guy, basically. He keeps surviving, and every time you're rooting for him to die, you're like, please let that guy die. He sucks so bad. And he keeps surviving the whole movie. And you're like, oh my God. And so that's like a big part of the entertainment.
Oh, man. Captain Goodnight has a question for you. It says, do you see Spaceman's final interaction with WizKid in Earthbound number 2 as the villain's redemption? That was unexpected what he did.
Yeah. And hopefully, if it's unexpected, hopefully it like makes sense in hindsight, or like, hopefully it doesn't break the character. But that is like some of those climactic events towards the end. Yeah, he kind of gets probably the most of like at least a little payoff arc where he does something kind of nice instead of mean at the end, basically.
Is it kind of like a redemption arc in a way for him?
Yeah, but even that one, like I might do this if I was doing it now. I might be more deliberate with it. That one, it was more accidental, which has its own charm, and it's kind of like a rookie charm that that worked out. But I was kind of really just trying to. What was my super guiding light on writing that script was the strategy is the story. So I'm like, they need just what would they do if they just want to win this competition, and just what would they do? That's the story. So I didn't have to think too much about like arcs and this and that, and I'm like, and that liberated me and helped. It worked for that story. It doesn't always work. What I stole that from is from Dawn of the Dead. George Romero's 1978 movie does that to a T also, where there's no real story other than it's just the strategy of what they do to try and survive.
Then this is the situation, this is what happens, and it's playing out.
Yeah, and I tweeted that, and someone responded, and they go, this is a hot take, but these movies have the same plot, and it was Swiss Family Robinson, and I was like, that's kind of one too, where the strategy is the story, kind of.
Yeah, I could see that. Hey, Jose Garcia, I'm glad you're loving this show. Thank you, buddy. All right, so that brings me to wanting to talk to you about something that's near and dear to my heart, and I want to get your take on it. I'm a big fan of episodic storytelling. And what I mean by that is telling stories in episode format, whereas everything is not a slave to a larger arc, although they all play a part in that larger arc. There's a continuity. But what you're getting still is a story, a story, a story, beginning, middle, and end. Not just like it's the beginning, sort of a setup, and then the next one's, we're kind of diving a little deeper, here's another layer, and then the next one. But they never have a fulfilling, they're not a meal. They're like little courses within the larger meal. You're never really full, though, with each episode, each issue, whatever it may be. I really love episodic storytelling. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we've talked a little bit about this before. I do love it, and I love that you're doing it. And as you're talking, I was just thinking too, like Brian K. Vaughan, he's a great writer, whatever. Maybe he got a little bit of the work going on, I don't know. But his what was it? His what's his sci-fi one called? Saga?
Is it? Oh, okay, Saga.
He was talking about writing Saga, and he's like, yeah, I just write 3 scenes, and then that's usually about 20 pages, and that's the issue. And I was like, no, that's bad. Even though, like, I'm almost more in that part for some of my projects than the episodic for Earthbound stuff, but I love it, and I'm working on my own stuff to try and get more episodic. But I think for comics specifically, too, like, really benefit from episodic stuff. TV does, and nobody does it anymore either, so which is weird. That's another
rare.
Yeah, it's kind of a backwards thing because it seemed, what part of it is it takes, like, you got to be pretty good to do it. I think, like, people try it and they can't even do it, so then they just do. The bigger thing is actually easier in a lot of ways,
and then just chop it up, But I find that there's so many shows out there. I watch them and I'm like, yeah, it's pretty good. The characters seem, pretty interesting, but that plot, I don't see that plot lasting, multiple seasons. What is this? But if they tackled that plot was 2 or 3 episodes, and then here's this other plot, just maybe 2 or 3 episodes. Here's another one, maybe it's 1 episode. These are kind of quicker stories. You can develop characters faster. There's a lot more that happens. And then also, if you're not that thrilled with one of the plots or one of the episodes or issues or however it may be, there's another new one coming down, the lane in just a week, a month, whatever it may be, in terms of how you're telling that story.
Yeah, that's one too that, as I think about it, it's shows that did that. They're very memorable, and they can be kind of like legendary. Like Star Trek is legendary, and it's episodic.
Look at how many stories they told, right?
Yeah, and it's because the show's great, but then the episodes, so people will even talk about the episodes, they'll talk about the show, and like that whole culture is really fun. I mean, Futurama's like that, which is a riff on Star Trek, but even The Simpsons is sort of like that, these good old shows, Seinfeld. The episodic stuff, it adds a lot to the memorability and the ability to plug into the culture. Whereas when it's this, speaking of another problem kind of with the comics, if you don't do episodic, it means people can't even access into the story unless they start at 1 and read all the way up to it. That's a huge negative.
Very intimidating and kind of keeps you at an arm's length because you're like, oh no, I think I might have missed it. And if it's a comic, depending on how many issues they're in, you're like, well, that's it for me. If I can't catch up, if they're not reprinting everything, if they're not putting it out as a trade all the time, it turns into, well, that's it. I am not going to read that. Yeah. But if you've got episodic, you can come in on issue 20 or 50 or 100 or whatever. And you're like, no, that character, I get it. That character and this character and that situation's happening and this is the conflict that's going on. And, you can pick it up a lot easier.
Yeah. And then you got people being like, that one, issue 9 of it was my favorite or whatever. Someone's like, actually, I really like issue 16. That was the best.
Right. But if it's these big, long story arcs with this kind of decompressed storytelling, whether it's comics or TV or whatever, and even it scares me nowadays that I see movies going towards this because everything's becoming a universe. They all want to have these universes. And and then they're going to find ways to tie in the universes that weren't universes to begin with. So now there's a metaverse, a multiverse aspect to it.
Yeah.
And then the multiverse aspect of it becomes crushed under its own weight because you can't possibly tell that multiverse type story so seamlessly and effectively that it's not going to be confusing. It's still going to be confusing, and it's going to end up seeming like a cheap shortcut just because you want to tie stuff into each other. So all of it's I look at it and I see what's happening with films, and I'm like, oh boy, I don't like where that's headed.
Yeah, it's what writers want to be too. Is like a weird, like, where are you in history? Where I think writers want to be writing miniseries for TV, and so even if they're working in movies, like movies is a tier below. They're like, shoot, when will I get my big gig on TV doing a big miniseries? And so they're even writing movies are getting longer and longer, and that's kind of strange. And yeah, so I don't know where it's going. But
yeah, it is. It's very strange. Micra says, to me, multiverse was the breakout when we really screwed up, not something you intentionally move into. Yeah, and I feel that there's a lot of multiverse stuff, especially when you talk about the superhero films, where it seems so forced and such like a gimmicky tie-in to make all of the other things become like, oh no, they're sort of still connected.
Yeah,
and it's
so stupid. I hope Deadpool 3, they say that's going to be multiverse. I'm like, it better only be multiverse so they can make fun of it, and then I'll actually really be excited.
Hopefully.
But if they're like doing the multiverse thing just to try and get more stupid butts and seats or whatever they think how that works, that'll be it's so much. There's been like 7 multiverse movies in the past 2 years even, and it's ridiculous.
It's strange. It's a strange push to do that kind of storytelling, because again, I mean, talk about becoming a slave creatively to the story arc. If now all of a sudden you have to think about, well, this is gonna have to be a part of however many movies since however long, and we're gonna have to eventually find a way to make that work and make that make sense, and then that's exhausting. That's exhausting. Yeah. You can't be creative and explore different options and do different things, and without it being like, well, remember, we got to tie it in somehow. That's crazy. You might as well just tell the idea of the episodic style, where what they were doing largely before with a lot of these things, where it was like, this movie dealt with this situation and these characters. That movie, maybe linearly we move forward and it deals with that situation and those characters, but not forgetting the things that came before. So people don't have the amnesia about things. They still remember, like, that's kind of what came before. But when you have these movies that seemingly don't have any connection, and the same thing goes with comics and to a lesser degree some TV, I guess. It to me, it feels like it defeats the whole purpose of what these things are for, which is escapist entertainment. It feels like it's reality part 2. Like, it feels like homework. Yeah,
the episodic stuff, even for movies, like James Bond is an example, where even that, the new James Bonds, they're trying to tie it into the old James Bonds. I'm like, no, every movie is a new James Bond adventure, and it can be a different actor every time. And nobody's trying to get the canon of James Bond of like, then he did this, and then he fell in love and almost died there. It's like, no, he just had a bunch of adventures. Let's look at some of them.
It's overthinking it, right? Because if you go with James Bond, now this is a theory I had about James Bond, that I thought that this is the only way they could make them all tie in whatsoever, is that 007 is, you surrender yourself. James Bond 007 is who you are. They're all different people. Yeah. But you take on the mantle of James Bond 007. And then afterwards, they either, if they're not dead, they all... You ever see The Prisoner? You ever see that TV series?
I've heard of it, is all, yeah.
So they would all go essentially to a place that's like where the prisoner exists, where they're outside of reality as we know it. They're on this private island, and they can't leave. They can't do anything. And you have all these James Bonds that have gone there, and that's where they live out their days if they haven't been killed in the line of action.
Yeah.
And you could even have a James Bond story where the latest one now is going there. He's getting retired. And maybe he tries to escape. And maybe there's another James Bond or two that's there while some of them are still alive or not alive.
Yeah.
But you could have that. And you could have done a story like that and make it like James Bond is a mantle. And that's why you could have all these different people playing him in different time periods. But do they need to do that? No. Do I want to see them do that? No. You don't need any of that to happen. You could just have these stories play out. So it's so weird to me where we keep going down this road where we are overthinking it to the point that it's and you notice it too with children's entertainment. So now I'm going to talk about like 80s and 90s children's entertainment. We'll talk about that for the next 5 minutes or so. And I want to get Narwhal's thoughts on this. Do you notice that back in the 80s and 90s, it seemed like children's entertainment, whether it was comics or TV or movies, was thematically way more mature and intense than it is today?
Yeah, definitely.
Because it really seems as if they kind of assume at some point that, and I don't know if it's an overall dumbing down of storytelling that has occurred, because it probably is. But it's amazing to me, the stuff that they did back in the day with the storytelling that took place in comics and TV. You know, all I could think is like some of the episodes of Batman the Animated Series were unbelievably intense and moving.
Yeah.
And that was generally aimed at kids. You know, but today, and they went with it. The kids went with it. The kids loved it. I loved it as a kid. You know, I don't. Were you a fan of Batman the Animated Series?
Definitely. Watched it every day.
Yeah, you know, so it was like appointment television as a kid. And it was intense. And yet, meanwhile, now today, it seems like if you were to show that to a kid, most people, if you were to just discuss what occurred within an episode of Batman the Animated Series, most people would be like, I don't know if that's appropriate for kids.
Yeah.
And why not? Why not?
Well, even back then, all of my friends their parents would let them watch rated R movies. So I'd be like, what happened? Can I come over and can we watch like RoboCop? And like we'd be watching RoboCop, and like it's not that big a deal. Like that, and that's like kind of good for kids almost. It's if you compare it to getting like pandered down to almost like really in a negative way.
It's a kind of to talk down to the kids and it's infantile subject matter. It doesn't actually have any kind of sense of storytelling, character development, any kind of morality on any level. It just seems like the whole point of it is to exist, and existing is just good enough. You know, and that is where, and to come full circle again, that's where I feel like so much of it has become propaganda. Because that's the messaging that you're putting across. I mean, you can make an argument that every single story ever made is propaganda. That is an argument that someone can convincingly make. I do believe that. But what are you pushing? What is the message that you're pushing? Now, if the message you're pushing is essentially to tell especially children that it's just good enough that you're here and that you're existing. There's nothing to strive for. There's nothing to make you think about right or wrong. There's no such thing really as consequences. You know, shame is a word we shouldn't even use. You should never feel anything of shame or guilt about something, especially when you do something wrong. You know, these are weird messages to send to children in media, entertainment, storytelling that's generally geared towards children.
Yeah. It is weird what's happening, and I don't know I was gonna say with kids too, they might hate movies now. Like we used to love movies as kids. I don't think kids like movies that much anymore. They like play video games or whatever.
And you know what? It goes back to what you're talking about and why they might be more engaged with games, interactive storytelling.
Yeah,
it's more
they know where
immersive.
they can get a little fix of their mind or whatever.
Yeah.
I know some of my friends have really little kids, and they will do the TV babysitter thing sometimes if they have to, where you can put a movie on and the kid will watch it and sing along but that at that age, it's not even like about the plot or whatever, or like the entertainment. It might be like Blue's Clues or Dora the Explorer kind of stuff. Not really like if you're looking at like one of the new Pixar movies versus Toy Story, how good Toy Story was versus the new Pixar stuff is like, oh, you felt like you were describing a lot of the new Pixar is like, whoa, this is like almost not a story. Like they almost aren't telling a story. It's like a pamphlet.
Yeah, like they're doing everything they can to not really tell a story while telling a story.
Yeah, yeah. It's because they're scared. I think it's like a form of self-censorship. It's kind of the political correctness, brainworm, woke, blah blah blah. But
It's so strange. It's so strange. And if the chat, if you feel like I'm completely missing the mark here, please feel free to correct me or give your viewpoint as well. Micra says kids love movies. It's just it has to hook them almost immediately. My nephews and nieces and their friends are either in or out in the first 5 minutes. Yeah, I think that's kind of the case for just even adults. I know within like the first 5 to 10 minutes whether or not I want to continue with a film or a show. You know, how are you with that? Are you pretty good with that?
Yeah, I do. I have allowed myself to turn off movies. I didn't do that for the longest time. I'd be like, I'm going to pick it, I'm going to give it its due and watch the whole thing. But now I'm like, life's short. If it's not working for me,
speaking my language. Yeah, I've seen too many of those the whole way through thinking like it's going to pay off. It has to pay off.
Yeah.
Especially when people like it. You know, I'm hearing things about it and people seem to enjoy it. And I'm like, it has to pay off. People seem to like it.
Yeah.
I have too many of those. I'm like, nope. You got 5 to 10 minutes and that's it. Jaded One says, my son doesn't watch anything anymore except for anime. Wow.
They're taking us over. And maybe they should.
Look at that. Japan's revenge. Oh man. All right, everybody, thank you guys so much for watching tonight. Narwhal, thank you as well. We went a little bit over the hour, but I could talk another hour of storytelling with Narwhal and picking his brain about writing and modern day stuff and what's occurring as well as what's occurring in his books. Maybe I'll have to have you come back on the show in a month or so.
I would like to, if you don't mind. I had a great time. Thanks for having me. And also, you have a live campaign, and so we should promote it on my channel too in the next couple of
Oh
weeks.
man, that's so gracious of you, man. Thank you.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Let's do it.
What
so
a guy.
I'll DM you about that. We can, because I usually will have you on the last time you had one too. So it's always nice because this time you were talking to me the whole time. We didn't get to talk about your stuff that much.
Oh yeah, well I mean I wanted to have you on to talk writing and all kinds of other stuff with you and your thoughts on what's occurring right now and the scope of storytelling. Because like I said, every time I come across one of your videos and your live streaming, even if I'm not in the chat, I watch it and I see the passion that's there and you care deeply about storytelling and the process and creating characters and having the audience engage with the story. This isn't a lot of stuff nowadays that you really get the sense that people care so much about that, you know, and that's what you should care about if you're a storyteller. Ironically, right? You should care about the story that you're telling.
Yeah.
And who you're telling it to.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's a nice compliment. Thank you. That's cool.
Yeah, it's great to see how passionate you are about it, and you're really bringing it. I hope people learn a lot from you too, because you've got a lot. Whether or not you realize you're teaching so much of it, if someone's out there, I really recommend them tuning into your channel when you're doing these deeper dives into dissecting like every tiny nuance of writing and the thought process that goes into it.
Yeah.
So important.
Yeah, thank you. And you're real quick too. My channel, it has 3 10-minute videos that are not live streams, and those are like fully edited mini documentary style, kind of like what video essays or whatever. Like YouTube has a ton of them, and mine didn't go viral, but one of them I did on the Matrix. It's up to like 2.5K. So for me, that's good. And I'm going to try to make a few more. But those are good to jump in, and I recommend anyone, even you, Peter, I bet you to enjoy them. And they talk about interactivity basically. But
oh, nice. Yeah, I saw one of them. I think it was like interactivity and storytelling. I forget the rest of the title, but that was one of the ones that made me want to reach out to you. And I was like, yes, we have to talk about this. Because I remember you were like, I don't really have anything to promote just yet. I'm like, let's just talk about writing.
Yeah, nice.
Let's just talk about writing.
Yeah, thanks. Cool. That's cool you saw it. That's awesome.
Yeah, man. Keep it up. Yeah, I agree. Sub to Narwhal. Narwhal's link for his YouTube channel that I'm talking about is in the description of the show. And I'm looking forward to having you on again. Now, before you go, you do have something that you're coming out with in a couple of days. Is that correct?
Yeah, this Sunday is like a big campaign release. Cerberus is almost completely fulfilled. There'll actually be, I think, one last tier I'll be doing next Monday. So Cerberus is almost completely fulfilled. And then the new Earthbound launches this Sunday. And it's basically Earthbound 3. It's called Earthbound Grand Prix. Earthbound hints a lot about this big fighting tournament. That's kind of why the events of Earthbound are happening, is people are recruiting and kidnapping and coercing fighters for this tournament. And then 3 years later, the tournament happens. It's kind of like the Olympics. It only happens every cycle.
Okay.
And so we kind of jump in and see where our characters are all in different spots, but they're kind of coalescing to this huge event. And like, it's where anyone who's anyone is going to be there. And yeah, they're going to fight, but they go there to party just as much as to fight. And so then within this kind of the story, there's a murder mystery while the tournament's playing out. WizKid's there, like undercover actually. So it's kind of like very loosely based on the plot of Enter the Dragon, Bruce Lee going into
That's
a
what
fighting.
I was just gonna say. I see that, like, I watched Enter the Dragon like every 3 months.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I know, it's great. That's a great plot. So it's like, I'm stealing that.
Oh yeah, classic. All right, thank you so much, everybody. Narwhal, thank you as well, of course, man. And we'll reconnect, and I'll have you back on the show again. And I'm looking forward to being on your channel too.
Cool.
Everybody, go take a look at Narwhal's channel. Give it a subscribe right there, But also, if you're on here, make sure you're subscribed to this channel too. If you enjoyed the video today, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Be honest. And then make sure, of course, that you are subscribed. Ring the bell for notifications. I've got all kinds of guests coming up tomorrow night at 9 o'clock Eastern. I've got Howard Desper of the Mythicals. He's going to be on the show tomorrow. We're going to be talking about that and among other things too. Friday. Yeah, Hojo.
Nice.
And then I've got Justin Belmont of Belmont Comics on Friday. And then Saturday, I've got Ethan Van Sciver to talk about Cyberfrog.
Oh, amazing. That's awesome. Hojo and Belmont are buddies too, so that's a good one too.
Oh, good. Back to back.
Yeah.
Sweet. So we got a lot of guests and shows and topics and all this other good stuff lined up on this channel. Thank you guys so much for joining me tonight. And Narwhal, thank you as well for being on the show tonight. It was a pleasure talking to you. And I'm looking forward to doing this again.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Everybody have a great night. See you tomorrow.